You are listening to Latinx America, a podcast focused on highlighting catalysts who are using, leveraging, or creating technology to help our community achieve more. With your host, Adriana Flores Ragade.
Happy New Year to you and your loved ones. I hope you had a chance to listen to some of the 2018 episodes we highlighted during the break. Today's guest is an amazing woman that I met at the Latinx in Tech event hosted by the Caper Center. Nancy Douyon is a trailblazer in human experience design with over 15 years of industry experience building scalable user research platforms and revitalizing user interfaces at leading companies such as Uber, Google, IBM, Cisco, and Intel. Throughout her career, Nancy has gained a reputation for delivering big results in a culturally honest and purposeful, disruptive way, with hundreds of products deployed in over 80 countries worldwide. She consults globally on remote user research methods and development in emerging markets. Her past research examined designs frameworks around the promotion, development, and implementation of global policies around user experience in tech. Nancy is currently developing the Douyon Signature Labs, Silicon Valley's first social enterprise research institute focused on bridging the gap between human potential and tech innovations. She's proudly Haitian, has traveled to over 70 countries, and speaks fluent sarcasm. In her spare time, she lectures on user experience methodologies, dances in carnivals all over the place, and lives her best life as written in her forthcoming book. Nancy, it's such a pleasure to have you here. We are both part of the Latinx in Tech event hosted by the Caper Center, and I've learned very briefly about you, but I'm super impressed. So why don't we start with both your personal and professional journey into tech?
Sure. Super interesting. I was an immigrant, sort of, in this country. My parents are from Haiti, Okai. It's from the south side. They're farmers. They came to America on a visitation visa. And back there in the 70s and 80s, if you showed good behavior within 7 years, you could get a green card. That didn't necessarily mean anybody was going to help you get anything. So I lived in a mostly illegal Haitian community in Boston. And everything I went to school to learn, I would have to bring back to the community and educate that community. As you know, Latin folks tend to be very community-oriented. And so I very quickly realized the limited resources that I had around me, where I would ask certain kinds of questions and no one could answer them. I remember, for example, my mother believed that the bigger the book, the smarter I would be. They're middle school educated, both my parents. And I mean, that actually ended up proving to be very successful for me, but it made me wildly curious about everything. There was even a point where they had made me read the Bible so much that I was trying to be a virgin like Mary. And when I talked to them about that, that was very stressful to talk to an 8-year-old about what a virgin could be, right? When the context clues were saying something else. As I kept asking questions and getting more and more curious, no one around me could answer those questions, and it made it very difficult for me to really understand American culture as well, because I was in this siloed community. So one day, for example, I read a back of a magazine that said, "Do you have questions?" And I didn't realize that when it said, "Do you have questions?" it was about the address of, writing letters back in the day for any of the millennials on there. Feedback or whatever that you wanted to comment. I thought they could answer anything. Limited perspectives, right? So I went over to this place in a roundabout way. They asked me several questions I couldn't answer. They asked me what my birthday was. I did not know what my birthday was because my parents didn't think that was valuable information from their culture or from where they were from. That was valuable if you were getting a passport, but we weren't going to celebrate you specially differently from everybody else, right? So I didn't know my birthday, I didn't know my address, I didn't know my phone number, and they sat me in front of a computer. It was the first time interacting with a computer. Now, I had assignments that required a computer very late, but at that point, my parents didn't have the money for it. So I was that person typing on typewriters from the yard sales. You know how, I don't know if you know, but Caribbean people will love them some flea markets and all that.
I love them too.
Yes. And so I had a typewriter, and I would literally, when I found out whiteout existed, I was so happy because how hard it was to write up a report. Sat me in front of a computer and said, let me teach you how to play solitaire. The first question I asked was, why was the background green? And the first answer they gave me is like, who cares, right? And that's where literally I started saying, you guys a lot of people tell me they don't care, they don't have answers for a lot of these things, but you have quite literally no idea if you're being manipulated, if like things are happening to you, all because you guys refuse to have these answers. You're fed information and nobody wants to learn on their own. Well, I expect to find out why this background's green, either whether you care or not. Now I know, right, the background's green because it's supposed to emulate a table, right, that's like that. And that was not that difficult to really come about, but that led to me wondering a little bit more about the technologies around. You might have heard me mention that I used to break all the fans in my house and take the motors, which isn't nice to a Haitian household, right? Especially in the summertime. But I wanted to like figure out how to make it do things. You know, I had learned that you could connect it to a battery. And so this program, this magazine that I had run away to, and my mother had caught me from, but never told me how, because she couldn't speak English. I don't know how she found me. They helped her put me in a robotics program. And I took a summer of robotics and I said, what's next? What do we do? From there, you know, after spending literally a year with this program, just trying to absorb as much knowledge, and mind you, not even a program, it was a, a magazine called Teen Voices. I ended up going, being led to MIT Media Lab, where I was showed that these folks will answer a lot of my questions. And I became a little bit of a lab rat experiment, and that's where my coding experience started at age 12.
So you started coding at age 12. You're coming from an immigrant family and experiencing a different culture, assimilating to U.S. culture at the same time, or acculturating.
Constantly.
Yeah, constantly, because you, in order to thrive, you know, you had to kind of you had to acculturate in some way. Tell me a little bit more about your experience. You know, at MIT, we were talking a little bit earlier about Scratch. My daughter uses Scratch. My husband is graduated from MIT, and he's been using it with her since she was like a baby, 18 months, because that's how they created Mother's Day cards and Grandma Day's card. And but now she can code and she's learning Python. But Scratch,
Amazing.
Tell me all about Scratch and you.
So to give you a little bit of background of how I even learned how to get started with coding, I remember I was at the Media Lab. This guy named Mitchell Resnick was kind of showing me some of his experiences and experiments, I suppose. And a lot of them, what he was shown to me had to do with Legos, right? And how to make these little toys move in a way. So if you notice with Scratch, there's like these kind of block-like features, very similar to playing a game. And so they were trying to figure out a way to make it lighthearted for children to be able to access. What's super interesting is I'm pretty confident I'm the first child user of Scratch. And the reason I'm pretty confident of that is because I was in every meeting and as a teenager, or many meetings at least, where they were testing things and asking us about our feedback about this program. So I tend to tell people that Scratch was designed around my own experiences, kind of learning how to code, because that's literally what I felt. I mean, from 12, not only did I learn how to do that, I learned how to do 3D automation. I used to learned audio production, which was amazing. I learned how to do all types of artistic tools. I mean, I know so many tools that children shouldn't know per se, but what they would do is tell me to try these industry level tools, right? And tell me to just have fun with them, that it would not break. And that, I think, started this journey of how can we create technologies that are something that, you know, can be introduced to folks like as young as I was, right? A fun story that a lot of people don't really talk about is some research came out at Google about the women who work there, and 98% of the women who work as engineers started off at age 12.
Oh.
That's crazy, right?
Wow.
Yeah, and so the earlier you start, and I think my sister's a middle school teacher, where people are trying to identify their own identity, it's important to understand what perceived ability does to people. Does that make sense? So for example, I find it really interesting that women in the United States have a lot of difficulty doing math, where in other countries that is not the case. I find it super interesting that computer science is something that's super difficult supposedly for women to do in the United States as well, when in the 70s and 80s, when computer science was like this hot new thing, it was considered secretarial work for women. So my mentors were all women. And so to be in a space where you're surrounded by women, you're surrounded by the play aspect of technology, and then learning when you get to college that no, this is supposed to be difficult, and this is supposed to be for men, and this and that. It was just completely untrue. And so I say this back to think about like Scratch it was such a beautiful way to kind of take away some of these perceived abilities and provide something that was playful, right? To get people started in coding and not so intimidated based on some of the data that's spreading around about what minorities or underrepresented people can and can't do around certain spaces or trades or things like that. I do want to add another point that is interesting. I think I was born an engineer. I think I was born that way, and I'm pretty confident that no one can try. I mean, it would take a lot for somebody to try to convince me differently of that. One of my favorite questions to ask people, because I once was told that I was an engineer, even though I was coding early and doing things early, because I did not originally have a degree in it, even though I had jobs in it, people felt like, you don't have a degree, which makes you unable to do this, right? You're saying your daughter is using Scratch. I would almost argue that she's probably an engineer too, right? One of my favorite questions that I was saying is that I tend to ask people, if colonialism did not exist and industrialism did not exist, what role would you play in your tribe? Because I promise you wouldn't be twiddling around your fingers. I go back to this farmland, and computer science may not be a universal truth. That's what I call these things when you think about the fact that in my community, no one was going to be a computer scientist. There was no, unless somebody came out there and taught it to them, no one's going to teach them that. But they were building bridges without education. They were building houses without a degree. They were medicine people without a degree. They were mediators without a degree. So these are things that hold true in any tribe, and I think that my root is storytelling, and I've chosen engineering as my path of delivering it, right? And so I say this to say that I think that back to this perceived ability, right? It is really important to know that no one can tell you what you are able to do. And I learned that very, very early on from my mother when my father told me I could not shovel snow. And I know that sounds like this kind of roundabout way to get to that, but he told me that was a man's job, and that no daughter of his would be shoveling snow, because I wanted to go out and do it. And my mother waited till he went to work, and she says, Nancy, go out there, grab the shovel, go shovel some snow. Go out there, come back in, and she says, what are your thoughts? And I said, it was the worst experience ever. It was absolutely terrible. My hands hurt, my head hurts. Why would anyone put themselves through this? And she said, and that's why we don't shovel snow. It's not because we can't, it's because we don't want to, right? It's because we don't want to. Don't ever let anyone tell you what you can and cannot do. You will always have a choice with what you can and cannot do. And that has kind of led to my confidence throughout my career to manage working at places like Cisco, IBM, Intel, Google, Uber. You know, all these companies know about me, not because of whatever they think I'm capable of doing, because, you know, a lot of the time I do get these folks who want to say, like, let's take it easy on you. You've got the Asian dude near me sweating bullets. He doesn't want to do the work that you gave him. And I'm excitedly saying, give it to me. And you're saying, well, we don't want to scare you off. Because of your own explicit bias that you're unaware of, you know. And today I'm going to speak a bit about what happens when you don't take into account your own privilege, power, implicit and explicit bias, and how that leads to designing around the globe that is really destructive. So I'm hoping to share a bit about that.
Why don't we start by learning about your field, because you're an expert in your field, and maybe we can move on to some of the knowledge that you're going to share today with the rest of the audience here.
So I'm a human factors engineer. What that is really understanding the biological and psychological factors of human beings and then designing things with that knowledge, right? So examples might be when you go to a casino, right? They paint their walls red to keep you more alert. They pump oxygen into the room. They don't put clocks on their walls on purpose. They put their most addictive machines by the bathrooms and the exits. They lower the ceilings on blackjack tables to create a more intimate experience so you stay there longer. Completely designed without your knowledge, right, of staying there. Now, it can also technically be used for good, right? And so a lot of people, for example, don't know why bars lower their lights at night. Bars don't really understand that. People say the word intimacy, but a lot of people don't know what intimacy means from like a scientific standpoint. And so one thing that's interesting to know is that when you take light away from your eyes, it increases your hearing, which creates a little bit of a closeness to you. That means that the person in front of you, you'll be able to really fully experience them. Thinking about the sensors that you shut down around people to fully be intimate with somebody. So that's what's happening when you're in a bar, for example. If it's in a crowded room and it's bright lights, you'll be shouting at each other. But here I am in school, I was working on a PhD in human factors engineering, and one of the things they stated was, if you want someone to be quiet, and you don't want to write these words, because nobody reads user manuals, no one reads anything, right, anymore. What you do is create a space that makes them do things. So they said the libraries and museums that are properly designed, they're designed so that they echo. Because when you hear yourself speak, you lower your voice because you become self-conscious. And I'm hearing this, and I'm like, wow, that is fascinating. But is that true for a Latino? Right?
Okay.
Would that be true if a Haitian walked into a room that had echoing going on? And that's where I found my niche, right? I started realizing there was a gap in the field, which was the cultural gap. You can study people's biological factors and you can study people's psychological factors, but if you don't have the right subset of sample of people and you're only studying from a westernized standpoint, you're missing the perspective of the rest of the world. Therefore, you don't know what you're introducing into spaces when you design from this mentality that we know what's best for the world, right? So I'll give you a personal example where I went to India and Nepal. Well, I wanted to wear a sari and I had asked permission if I could wear them because people were wearing them everywhere.
Okay.
I didn't want to culturally appropriate. People were like, it's fine. It's super fine for you to go wear a sari. So I go to a store. There's a language barrier in the store. I'm comfortable with language barriers. I've been to so many countries. I think I might have said
70?
Over 70 countries I've been to, mostly by myself. So my poor family, who lives in Haiti, by the way, now, they moved back to Haiti and they still live there. They don't really understand, but I definitely have a really interesting global perspective when it comes to how I design for the world. And here I am in the store. We have a language barrier, but that doesn't give me a problem. I want a sari, and he's showing me materials that I would say aren't as attractive as what I'm looking for. So I started repeating over and over again, Beyonce. Right. I want that Beyonce level sari. Beyonce. Even if he doesn't know who Beyonce was, which he didn't seem to, he understood that whatever this Beyonce was some kind of grand gesture to say, I want more, right? And so we figured out this material. We get this thing made in 2 days, and I'm out in the streets walking around buying fruits and looking over my shoulder because everyone's staring at me, and I know I look great. I know I look very, very good. And a friend runs up to me and she says, what are you doing? And I'm like, I just got this sari made, girl, I'm out here flaunting it. And she said, Nancy, you're wearing a wedding dress, right? I had no clue that red and gold, remember I said earlier, casinos, red meant keeping you alert. I had no clue in India that red and gold represented wedding colors. So I looked like a runaway bride that got hungry, right? But that's not, in fact, what was going on. It was a misunderstanding. Funerals in India, they wear white to represent things. And if you don't understand these small things that are cultural differences, how are you building for these places? How are you saying to me that we went and taught Haitians after the earthquake sustainable design if you don't even understand how culturally they operate with their landmarks, right? There's no way for you to do that if you don't take into account additional information. And so one of the things I try to teach people is that, one, we don't know everything. We just don't know everything. But it's really important that we collaborate versus try to force feed something. A great example was when I was working at Google, there was a story told about how we were trying to build for Indian people, back to that, right? And we wanted to get them to use plain music, right? But we could not understand why no one would search through our music the way that we do. And so we're trying to get people to understand, like, here's soundtrack, this and that. Nobody took into account just asking really people, how do you search for things to know that they search to music by Bollywood titles, the movie titles, right? But even when we did learn that, we tried to force feed like this concept of soundtracks, but that's not what they're saying. They're not going to adapt to the American mindset of things. And what ends up happening is you start building, people will build their own solutions. And guess what? The most underrepresented people know how to do it with the most limited resources. It's a reason why you can give Black people or Latin people nothing and they're still thriving. They say here in the Bay that on average a family of four making $120,000 a year can ask for food stamps. That's poverty. There's a Haitian commune out here, right? I can promise you ain't nobody with a family of four living off of $120,000, but they are living and they are thriving. And how are they living and thriving? with such limited resources. This is where I see the value. And looking at these communities and saying, wait a minute, guys, we've been looking at this all wrong. If we study these communities that have the least, we may come up with the innovations that scale further, that spread across the globe further. And that's another thing that I try to impress upon these tech companies. I move around quite a bit. I've worked at a lot of different companies, and the message I try to leave them with is that you are ethically responsible for the technology and the things that you put out in this world. And you need to know that because your stuff scales faster than anything in the market, it is your responsibility to really make sure you understand the end users and truly understand them. And the way you do that isn't by telling them what you believe they need. It's not by sharing your assumptions. It's by asking questions to get from them, how can we co-design an experience that's better for you? And then understanding that that experience will probably make your own country better, right? It's not about America's the best country in the world. It's about all these countries have their ups and downs and great things. How do we get the best parts of these places if you're not even asking? If you don't even believe they have those things, right? How do you get the best out of me if you're already having me in this work, giving me a softball to start with because you think that that's going to help me, when the truth of the matter is a real challenge is going to get the best out of me, right? To give you some good work.
Yeah. And I was reading a report that was put together after some market research was done with Latino students. And they don't really understand rigor because the expectations that people have of them are so low that for them they don't feel prepared for for the careers of the future. And then B, they don't really understand what it takes to get there. So let's talk about how you got to where you are in terms of your journey. How does one become an expert in your field? Because you mentioned a PhD, but does everyone have to have a PhD?
Absolutely not. Okay. I would actually encourage, if people can look up my last name spelled correctly, then to check out my blog.
Which
on
is?
Medium. So it's just my name, Nancy Douyon. D as in David, O-U-Y-O-N. If you look that up, Google search it on Medium, you'll notice this thing called UX cheat sheets, right? And what that is basically what you need to do to get into the field, what you might need to know, without necessarily dealing with having to maybe go to a university or things like that. I'm mostly self-taught. If you heard me say, like, I've learned a lot of this stuff from elementary, middle, and high school, right? So by the time I got to college, it didn't really make much sense for me to get a computer science degree when at 16 I was teaching 2 computer science classes, right? And so I wanted to learn other things. I wanted to learn humanities. I wanted to figure out why there was not this bridge between tech and humanity. I also, unfortunately, when I was 14, I was put in foster care in America. And I say unfortunately because I had one of the worst experiences. I was in 8 different homes and dealing with a lot of different cultures. It was my first time being pulled out of my own immigrant community and dealing with America and some of the rules that they've created. And it's actually part of the reason I travel so much, why I'm so omnipresent in a lot of these places, is because I know that people don't question what's fed to them. I know that people just believe things without really truly understanding what that background came from. So when I'm being told in a household, if you don't eat with a fork in your left hand, then you're classless and you don't get dinner, that's outrageous to me. You can't not feed children in my culture. It's like impossible, right, to say that. If anything, punishment means you stay here and you don't leave until this plate is done, right?
Yep.
And so it was remarkable to me hearing these folks and questioning them and getting in trouble for questioning them. And so I question everything. I question every system, everything I learned in the classroom, I question, and I do a ton of research on my own. And that's what I mean by I learned a lot of this stuff on my own. And then I took the additional knowledge that I was getting from school and started piecing together systematically, really, the changes I could make in this world. I tried to figure out with everything, what is the best thing I can do long term to actually make the world see things differently. And to me, that solution was combining this world of tech and combining this world of humanities, which to me was also not very prevalent. That's when I learned about human-computer interaction. That's when I learned about human factors engineering. Just literally Googled all the words together. No one told me that these fields existed. No one, right? Found them and then said, you know what, I'm going to take a chance and get a master's degree on it. Learned what I could there, and it was thrilling. But what's thrilling about it is I learned from experience. And this is what these companies are looking for. They would prefer somebody who's experienced over somebody who just has a bunch of degrees, right, in something that can't showcase anything. I started building a portfolio of work, working from anything from a library to Pfizer, to like literally across the industry, all these different worlds. And I started learning how culture applies to a lot of these things. I said that there was no field or world of this. I wasn't taught these things. I found a gap and decided to digress on it, right? And to a lot of people's like kind of unfortunate, like they weren't very supportive of it because they just felt like what you're saying, one, is you're not going to get much support in because there's nobody really technical here that can combine that humanities side. There's not really people with humanities. There's ergonomics. There's these things we're teaching you, but for you to go out and create your own new world, that's a lot. That's a lot of stress on yourself to do. But I was adamant about, like, I had discovered, it was like an invention. I had discovered this thing. And I'm like, I believe that I've discovered something so great that I'm going to go forward and pursue this anyway. But the other thing they said was, no one's gonna listen to you if you can't prove that it makes money, right? That was probably the best lesson of all of this, right? They said, you know, that's all good and gravy, but a lot of these programs, these top-notch universities, whatever, what they prove in a lot of their work is there's profitable impact, or something decreased, something is impacted as a result of you introducing this thing. And that's where I started to work at all these companies. Could have been education or something like that, but I wanted to learn, all right, where are you losing money because you're not taking into consider these things? And it was pretty quick to find that out. It's like something that a lot of these companies just kind of cover up and they don't talk about because they just kind of chop it up to a failure. But I started uncovering those things. I started doing really interesting things to get that information as well, right? But back to what I'm saying is, a lot of this is about kind of trying to get to learn the basics. Scratch, like what your daughter's doing, is a wonderful start. And thank goodness she didn't stay there. She went from Scratch and hopped over to Python, which is really a really smart move. A lot of people don't even know why they're doing the things that they're doing and why they're going down the path. But it sounds to me like she has a better understanding of what she's trying to build. And it all started off in one place, right? And that's what I kind of want to encourage people to know, is that there's nobody responsible. Like, you don't have to pay someone to educate yourself. Mm-hmm. You really don't. If anything, that's why I think these corporations are to me. I'm now making money to learn, which is super, super exciting. And if you can get a portfolio set up to show people how excited you are to learn about these things, how you see these problems in the world, someone will give you, to me, at least a chance in this field, because I don't know if they talk about this, but there are so many more jobs in computer technology, engineering fields than there are graduates available. Every other field that exists, humanities and math and all this stuff, there are more graduates than jobs available. Only in computer science will there be maybe 2/3 more, that's what the statistics that I read, 2/3 more jobs available than graduates. What that means is there's an opportunity here for you to teach yourself. If you don't have the funds, this means that you can literally sit down, pick up a book, teach yourself the code, take your time with it, do it in a group with other people. There are programs online where you can literally walk through tutorials on how to go through Scratch and how to learn Python. It's not that painful. Again, back to this perceived ability, right? If you have an idea about what you want to build, like I was in WakandaCon, this is in Chicago, it's our first year ever, and it was super cool to watch young girls learning how to use AutoCAD to build their own crowns, right? If you can think of a project that's interesting to you and you can figure out how to combine tech, you can work backwards to figure out, okay, how do I get there? Without discouraging yourself and thinking like, I'm boiling in an ocean, I can't do this, right? I started with Legos. Okay, I started with Legos and look where I am now. And so the point is, I think that if people take a step back and actually take a start somewhere, you might be excited enough to even want to go to school to learn more about it, right? But you don't have to wait to be fed, right? You don't have to. You can get up and do these things, and it doesn't have to cost you $1 million to do it. You don't have to go through the making several mistakes in different fields. I went to University of Michigan for my graduate studies, and part of the reason I went there is because a little part of me was wondering, what if I made a mistake? Like, what if, I should have stuck to humanities or stuck to engineering? But because University of Michigan at the time was top 10 in every field, I'm like, if I make a mistake, I'll just go to the next department or something like that. So it ended up being the best fit for me for trying to continue my work. But I again learned pretty quickly that a lot of what came to the table is what I brought to the table. A lot of that was what made the difference, and everything else was supplemental education to what I was trying to do.
You've created your own opportunities, which is great. And I think in this field, especially in the tech sector, everything is so new. Things that weren't around 10 years ago are now, thriving. So how can we take advantage of this newness? There are corporations like Google that are no longer really requiring the college degree, and so there are other ways to get to achieve your dreams or to really focus on your passion, which you're very passionate about what you're speaking about. With passion also come challenges. What have been some of the challenges that you have had to overcome as a woman of color in the tech space?
Well, for one, it's just looking the way I do. No one can look at me and say that from looking at me that Nancy did robotics at 11 or 12. No one can see that. And so I get to deal with people's judgments all the time, right? All the time, to a point that the only way I was able to learn to deal with it when you're surrounded by 85% white males was to turn it into humor. Because I could not understand how folks could not see over their own power and privilege over me. Literally, I had people telling me, using words like I'm a subordinate. I had, I'll give you an example of probably one of the more destructive experiences for me, but it also built me up to what I am today, was when one of my first engineering jobs, I was very, very young, I was 20 years old, I thought I could beat racism by just being brilliant and saving the company millions of dollars. I had decided at night to work on a project, even though they wanted me to work on like interview guides. At night I decided to work on a different project, and it ended up being redesigning a QA system, that's a quality assurance system. Mm-hmm. And so when I presented it, people were like shocked, right? Because I had to do extra work just to prove to them that I was able to do the work after they told me no, that I couldn't do it. I thought I had won a huge battle there. I said, finally, people are not going to look at me and say that I don't belong here. I've proven it. And my degrees have proven it. All these things I've been chasing have proven it. And then we went through a reorg where they merged two groups together. It was about 150 of us in a room for a holiday party. Mm-hmm. And a woman gets on a mic and looks at me. Again, I'm 20 years old, and says, "Excuse me, ma'am, you're going to have to leave. This is a private party." And the reason she had asked me to leave is because I was the only black woman in that room. She said this on a mic because she was so sure I did not belong there. I'd been working there for 8 months, right? So sure. She thought I was some woman who had come off the street, walked into a room full of white people, picked up a plate, sat amongst them, laughed with them. If that was the case, they should probably give me a job. I'm too young to understand what's going on. All I know is that there is no way for me to beat this. I don't know how to beat this, especially when you are publicly making a fool of yourself in front of everybody. Now, half the room knew what was going on. I was in shock, and the other half of the room was confused because they knew who I was. So she's still on this mic and asking me, "Well, why don't I know you?" And I said, "Well, why don't you know half the people in this room?" And she said, "Well, let's get to know you now." And she stuffs this mic in my face, and I say to her, "You know what? I know where I'm not belonged." And I get up and I walk away, and I couldn't stay there. People tried to get me to stay there. But the look of pity across the room for me was just horrible. From there, it led to worse cases. And I can't wait to eventually get to a point where I can talk to some of these individuals about this. But the director of my program said to me, "I refuse to work at a company that would ever put somebody through something like this." I set up a meeting with HR, and I said, "With all due respect, sir, I'm 20. My mentors can't help me. There's no one that looks like me in tech, right? There's nobody at home I can talk to because they're too busy yelling, 'Sue, Sue, Sue,' all right? But I mean, I'm the only one in this space, and I need to know what to do to maintain my career. And you're telling me that I need to speak to HR. I don't want to. I don't want to talk to them. I don't want to talk to anybody right now. But you're telling me I have no choice." So even that level of privilege, you're telling me I have no choice, and you set me up for failure because you weren't even there with me. I sit in this room, and they have legal with them, basically working out a severance package to make me leave over somebody else's decision, right? I talked to the mentors that were in the company who were not in tech, but were people who have gotten pretty far for what they've done. And they said, "Nancy, keep your mouth shut. You'll be blackballed from industry if you speak up about this." And I remember thinking to myself, I can't believe there's no one here who can think about a different solution other than to stay scared. Especially when I know I'm smart, especially when I know I belong here, especially when I know I'm building things that have never been done before. And I made a decision at that point that I wasn't going to let the fears of other people stop me from doing what I had to do. So, at that moment, I kept my mouth shut. I let it go, so to speak. I left the company, right? But in the back of my mind, I kept saying, "You know what? I don't know why I have to keep proving myself, and that sucks that I have to, but somebody needs to be the person in this space, because mind you, I didn't have to stay in tech. I didn't have to stay in industry. I could have bounced off and started my own company, but I felt like somebody needed to stay there and be a motivating factor for all these other people coming in and hearing the same things I was hearing about what they could and could not do. I was willing to fight for me to be there, and I wanted to be an example for other people to see that, you know what, no one can tell me what my value is. No one can validate me but me. And I had to learn very quickly to shift that. And so as it felt like a disaster because I was too young in my mind to really process all of that, because I had no one. Like, I mean, leaders in the field that were so far up. And, you know, it took me a while to understand that they even were operating in the system, and they were lucky to get as far as they could. But what operated for them during their time probably wasn't going to take them to the next level of their life. And so for me, it said, you know what? I get it. Good and gravy that this is what you believe in. I'm going to be the next generation of people who change this story and change this narrative. And I think I've done a pretty good job at doing that. I'm hoping that when I leave industry, I still will be a source to industry to really think about what they want to do and to make this world a better place. And I also hope that the things I've learned from industry, I'm going to pour into my own practices so that I can help others like myself scale their products around the globe.
Thank you, Nancy. That's a powerful story with just a lot of, I had to find the word to describe it, because while you were narrating your story, I was angry, I was sad, I was happy that, you know, you found the path, but then I got angry again. So, you know,
look at me, right?
Yes, no, you're amazing.
Hair, I'm rocking it. I'll walk into any room and I'm ready for it. I understand now when I walk into a space that while others may already see a brand in their minds, I'm responsible when I walk out that room to let those people know exactly what they're dealing with. And I make sure that's very clear wherever I go. I keep my confidence, and I try to encourage people to keep their confidence, because again, I was born valuable. I was born an engineer. No one can take that from me. And so as far as I'm concerned, you can feel any kind of way. That sounds like a personal problem to me, but I'm here to do the work. I'm here to learn. I'm here to grow, and I'm here to take these skills and take things to the next level. And I can't, I'm listening to Andrew Gillum and Quartz right now talk about what his grandmother said about, you know, I could play in the pigsty with these folks and one person could enjoy it, or I could do what I was put on this earth to do and keep moving. You know, I see really, really, really bright things for myself, and it is important to me that I keep the mental health in place, that I continue to commune with my board of elders to keep me in a place where I recognize that, you know what, every door I've walked into was a door that no one in my past generation has ever been able to go through. I'm blessed. I'm gracious every time. I have everything to be full of gratitude about. And so I won't let people take that away from me. And, you know, that doesn't mean that I don't stand up for myself. Right. I certainly stand up for myself, right? But it does mean that I have to be very aware of my platform and make sure that I'm not, I would say, falling into the trap of other people's personal issues and what they see of me. I can't do that. I know I'm bigger than that. So, you know, it's all good.
And you're a big advocate now, which I think it's important and a role model. So let's talk about what you're going to talk about today. What would you like to share with our audience that you're going to be sharing? So everyone here, she hasn't even gotten on stage, and she will be sharing what?
I'm going to be talking about something I've coined as the term nobility complex. It's this idea that people don't recognize where empathy doesn't go far enough. They think they're being empathetic, right? That's the buzzword right now in tech, empathy, right? But you can't be empathetic if you don't recognize your own biases and the fact that you probably are patting yourself on the back to make yourself feel better, not actually helping people. This is where charity hurts. This is when helping hurts, right? Where you'll say to me, I'm talking about like the Haitian earthquake. I was there a day before the earthquake. My parents were caught up in that. My mother was missing for 6 days. My dad was missing for 2 weeks. They were alive and well, but during that time, the amount of people who wanted to help me and kept saying to me, Nancy, I know you're going through a tough time. Where can I send all these clothes? And looking at how I can look at that example and share what happens in engineering, right? I show pictures now when I repeat that. I'm going to show that today. Where do I send all my clothes to show destruction, floods? Where can you send your clothes? That's not a solution. That's somebody saying, listen, I have all this stuff, I want to feel better because I'm bothered by the pain that I'm experiencing for you. That's a really hard thing to tell somebody while you're experiencing pain. That, hey, I know you don't recognize this, but you're actually trying to cheer yourself up, and you never asked me what I needed. Because if you asked me what I needed, I might have told you I need to build search communities on Facebook. I might have told you that we need to put trees in the ground. I might have told you that there are people being hit by cars and we need wells. But you didn't ask me that, right? You told me, where will I send my winter clothes to Haiti, or whatever the case might be. And I see that problem in the tech industry. And so I'm going to go through examples in tech where that same thing has happened. So actual examples, what happens when you don't have a minority on your team? What happens when you don't have a woman on your team to make decisions? And how this impacts not just technology, but everything in our day-to-day, down to the water dispensers that use sensors that pick up on light, but not dark skin. Right? Down to the fact that facial recognition doesn't necessarily work for certain features, right? It's super, super interesting how we talk a lot about diversity, but we don't actually talk about the negatives impacts, the actual technology that has failed as a result of diversity not being at the forefront. So I'm pretty much, I don't like speaking on diversity per se, but I do like talking about inclusive design and trying to figure out how we can look at these differences as wins, and how we can incorporate these differences as opportunities for us to make millions and billions of dollars. And that's really the point here. And that's what I hope to share today is, hey, this may sound like a sad story, but what I'm actually trying to tell you, is that you have gold surrounded by you, but you don't know how to get to it, all because you're too busy trying to do what makes you feel better, right? But if you do what's right, which is get these people here giving their opinions, these different individuals, you might actually have an opportunity to change the world, not just for the better, but for your own pockets, right? For the pockets of people around the world. You're creating opportunity. I'm at Uber, and at Uber, helping them scale has been so phenomenal. They're now in 77 countries. It's so exciting to see how does one company from the US try to figure out how to build things in so many other markets. And what does that mean about where their market is located? I wish people only understood, is America the top market? What is the top market? And I feel like if every company looked back at their books and said, who's making us money, they would start to see that, hey, maybe there's opportunity to pay more attention to a global first initiative versus a US first initiative versus a westernized first initiative. So that's what I plan to talk about today.
Would you like to share one of the examples that you're going to mention up on stage?
Sure. I have stories for days, but stories for days. But I'll give you an example that I haven't really, I won't mention on stage just so you guys can have that tidbit. I interviewed at Oculus, the product, Facebook, right. And I have this fun habit of using interviews as networking opportunities and as well as a way for people to know what I work on. So I really think that it's really awesome to practice interviewing even when you're not looking for a job. And so here I am interviewing for this job, and they said, what makes you so excited? And I'm like, because I'm going to prove your product is racist, right? What a shocker, right? Especially I have a really wonderful relationship with the folks over at Facebook and things like that. And I wasn't trying to stir the pot in a way that was going to harm anybody, but I wanted to call attention to a problem that was there. And it was, I started off by kind of halfway joking and saying, do you know your product doesn't work for folks with turbans and folks with dreads? And the response I got was, well, that's not really our focus area. No idea that statement is actually quite racist. Quite racist. And I mean, it's so casual, right? And I said, all right, that's cool. Let's move on. Because I thought you might say that, right? Do you know your product doesn't work necessarily with the skeletal structures of West Africans? Again, I've heard this before in my career, that might come out in the next launch or something like that. Well, there was this funny thing called slavery that came over, right? So a lot of features of Latin and Black people are right. West African structures, but who cares about them? We're Asian people buying ski goggles, right? It's super interesting to me that the best way for me to get the attention of some of these folks is to focus on Asian people, right? To focus on telling stories about Snapchat and the fact that their filters can't pick up the little eyes, and so all their filters on Asian people end up being yellow face. I have this other running joke where I tell people I can look at any product area and tell you which your gender and racial makeup of your engineering team was. Because if it didn't work, I'm sure somebody would have been like, hey guys, this doesn't work for me, right? Or something like that. And I think that, so I've become this kind of like, I don't know, inclusive design whisperer, right? Where I go around telling folks like, hey, I know you don't have anyone that looks like me on your team, duh, but I just figured let me give you this nugget here while we're here. And you know, it was funny because the reaction to all of that was, because I put a good big old weave on that day. A big old weave was, because part of their interview process is you got to try the product. And it took 2 people to get this thing on my head. And they asked me if I was comfortable. And even though it was over my eyes, I said I couldn't breathe, you know, because it was just so tight across to try to get this thing on me. I talked about Daydream. Daydream is a product out of Google, and how they considered some of these backgrounds. They looked at socioeconomics, they looked at different structures, a lot of these things, and they built a product that was not only inclusive. The socioeconomic aspect is super interesting because if you look at cardboard, this VR system that is really, really cheap, they found a way to make inclusive, they brought VR to the rest of the world through cardboard. And they're still charging, they're still making money off of it, but what an awesome opportunity to really take into account all these issues that you say that you can't solve for access, and watch a company as big as Google solve for it, right? So it's not an excuse to me, it's just one of those things where, hey, let me drop some attention to it, and then if you'd like to learn more, for the small cost of, right, XYZ, you can learn why I understand these things, and maybe you may not figure out how that is. And half the gold is that I'm a Black woman. That's half the gold is that I'm a Latin woman, right? And thank God I am a Latina woman, because I joke a lot as well that, you know, African Americans are great people. African people so smart, all great. But Latin people are fiery. And thank God for that fire, because that is literally what has gotten me as far as I have, is the fact that I'm like, what? Who do you think you are talking to? You know, it's like literally ingrained in us to speak up, to fight back, to like, really, you know, I'm the child of revolutionaries, right? Toussaint Louverture, first free Black slave country. I have to put it in my work every single day, you know? And so it's exciting to me. It's thrilling. I told you I kind of bring a humor side to it now, that I can come up to folks and say, hey, this won't work. And this won't work because you don't have somebody like me on your team. And, you know, instead of telling to the world that, you know, we're very, very lucky, or you should be very lucky you got this job, you should see yourself as very, very lucky to have me here. Very, very lucky to have me here, right? Because I feel like you guys are lucky to have me, right? And I can't work for all of you, but, you know, I definitely want you guys to know what I'm capable of, so when you do need the help, you know where to reach out to. Yeah.
Wow. And with that, we're going to wrap up our interview. Is there anything else that you'd like to share? Some piece of advice that you wish you would have had before, especially for those that are listening, that are thinking about, you know, disrupting tech in some way?
You know, I would probably say travel. I was the one that my parents didn't really understand why I was going to so many places. Like, I was going to China and Nepal and, you know, all over Africa, and they were so terrified that I would be endangered. And one of the most surprising things I learned across my journey was how many women were traveling on their own. Like, you know, the things that they don't tell you. One of the other surprising things is what women experience, because a lot of our media is from a male perspective. I've had very, very different experiences in a lot of these places. And, you know, even like I remember when I went to the Middle East and my parents were like, that's dangerous. Hearing the perspective from the actual women on the ground in some of these places and seeing how they elicit their power, how they kind of make movements and changes, it's super, super interesting and exciting. But, you know, there's this thing that you need to have a lot of money, or that you need to know how to speak a language. All these things, or, you know, like, you know, you got to make sure you fully understand the culture or things like that before you get there. I think those are just stories. A lot of them are stories. I think if you do enough research, you'll know that you can travel, that it's sometimes cheaper to go to Europe than to travel within the United States, right? In fact, like I remember when I decided to travel across Asia, it cost me $300 round trip, right, to get to Hong Kong and back. And once I got out there, all my flights were decreased, because if you're buying flights from out there, the prices drop, right? In Europe, you can get flights for €39. What's that equivalent to? $45, $43, right? And so really travel and see the world, because traveling to me makes you question some of the things that are in your head, makes you pushes you out of that bubble, and makes you say, wait a minute, there's some great things here, and there's some things I like about what I've been taught and learned, but you always have a choice to shift your decisions and your thought processes. It's always your choice. And I think the best way for me to understand how much power I had in my own choice was seeing how people chose differently in this world. We're seeing how other people were so confident that, like in Spain, that me eating a rabbit, I should eat rabbits because Americans play with their food too much. They shouldn't be pets. Hearing so definitively in these countries, like I was in South Africa, and they were like, what is this beauty standard you have? And I joked about, like, tall, dark, and handsome, and hearing from these people, why does he have to be tall? I don't actually have any information to why I think that way, because in Haitian culture, women didn't have to be tall or short or whatever. That's something I learned in America. But really questioning a lot of your thought processes and then thinking to yourself, well, if everything is kind of in question, what does that mean about what I've chosen for myself and what limits me, right? And so that's my way of getting closer to my own soul, and figuring out what was actually truly universal, what was really within my ability, and what wasn't, was seeing the world and seeing how the world chose to kind of do things a little bit differently, and also understanding, coming back to the United States, how much free choice do you have? You leave this place and you come back and you don't even realize, like, you really can do anything here, right? It's really, really super exciting, that it's invigorating. I average about 13 countries a year. I've already hit 16 this year. And yeah, it's crazy, right?
What are we? What month are we? November.
In January, I was in 5 continents. So, eating Uber Eats in 5 continents, right? So, I'm very well traveled, and I definitely know a lot about the world, and I know a lot about politics, economy, all these things. And I tell you, it informs my work. I come back and I'm like, guys, I know so many new things. I see the world so differently because it literally has shifted. It's brought out the innovation in my mind. That experience in India with the wedding dress shifted my whole psyche on how my education was taught to me. And it was important that it did. It was important that something was introduced to my psyche that said, maybe there's some way you can do this differently. And, so that's my encouragement to everybody. I hope they learned something from this. And I hope you've learned a lot too.
I have. No, thank you so much. And we will follow your next play, because I think it's really important that when you meet someone like you, that we continue to follow your path as you grow, and hopefully benefit from the knowledge, the experience, good and bad experiences that you're having, and that we can share them with others. So thank you so much for sharing your personal stories, your professional journey, and just so much more.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we've covered most of the emerging technologies in previous episodes, so we will now go back to defining key terms. The term for this episode is user experience design. I found an article written by Laura Flagg. She is a user experience designer, and she talks about UX, and you can find a link to this article on the note pages of the episode. In her definition, she shares that at its core, UX is about considering the needs of the people who will be using the product. For example, a website, an app, or another product. This is the product that you're designing, and then going a step further in placing your users, not yourself or the CEO, at the center of the design process. Nancy is an expert on human experience design, which really takes into account the needs of users, customers, and stakeholders. And you can find her on LinkedIn and on Twitter. She's always posting and sharing insightful information, not only about the human experience design, but also just in general about things that are going on in her life, and just wonderful pieces of advice that I've seen in some of her tweets. Thanks again for listening to our first episode of 2019, and don't forget to provide feedback and rate our podcast on whatever platform you use to listen.
Thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Latinx America and on Twitter at America Latinx, or email any questions or ideas to latinxamerica@gmail.com. Gracias y hasta la próxima semana.